Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's distance learning with Portland Cocktail Week. My name is Corey James. I am the brand ambassador for Montelobos and Ancho Reyes. Ancho Reyes is the sponsor today, which is perfect for what we're going to be learning with Claire. Ancho has a really rich history dating back to 1920s Puebla, where the Reyes family was the first family to sort of create this beautiful spirit meant to be shared amongst friends and family in times of celebration. They were utilizing poblano chilies, which is Puebla's most prized crop, sun-drying these chilies for a period of time, transforming them into ancho chilies, and then macerating them into a neutral cane spirit, with just a touch of sugar. Campari's been really fortunate over the last couple weeks and the coming weeks to have partnered with Portland Cocktail Week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, showcasing the talents and vast knowledge of a bunch of different individuals across the country. One of which is with me today, Clare Gordon. Hi, Clare.
Hello.
Clare has been sort of born into this hospitality industry and has been a pastry chef for most of her life. So it also makes her very, very perfect for what we're going to be discussing today. And she's going to use Ancho Reyes in these applications, which I'm very, very excited about. Clare, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what we'll be doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from Portland, Oregon. I live in New York City now, which is why we have a very small kind of stage for this class here. But yeah, I've taught this class a few times for Portland Cocktail Week. It's always super fun, and it has kind of gotten better each time because people ask different questions. I'm not a bartender, so I have ideas for how you can use these kind of concepts in kind of a practical application in a bar, but I always learn so much from the people who are, in the class and asking all these awesome questions and bringing all of these great ideas. So I'm gonna be talking about how to kind of use citrus in fun and sustainable ways, and then we're gonna do a couple of candy demos with Ancho Reyes, as you mentioned, and yeah.
Amazing.
But, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
So first I'm going to talk a little bit about just like basic use of tools, because I know pastry and bar, I think share the most in technique-wise in the restaurant. Like we both measure everything, we both use a lot of sugar, we both use extreme temperatures, like we need very, very cold, and we cook things with sugar and infuse things. So we share a lot of techniques, but I think that in pastry there's a lot of kind of learning you do before you actually apply your techniques. And in the bar, you don't often learn how to use a scale, for example, which I'm going to talk about. So I'll start with a scale because it's a really important part of both pastry and bar world. At least I think it should be an important part of the bar world. So I think everyone thinks that they know how to use a scale. I definitely have seen people use it wrong. I know that scales are kind of made to adjust for wind in a kitchen. Like there's hoods blowing, there's kind of people walking by. So it's really important to kind of know how to measure small ingredients or small amounts of ingredients. And I don't think a lot of people do. So when you add something like salt, especially if you're like testing a recipe, it's really important to add it off the scale instead of on. So for example, I'm gonna measure 3 grams of salt, say. So if I'm measuring like this really slowly and waiting for that kind of number to go up, I'm waiting. What the scale is doing is adjusting to what it thinks is just wind kind of falling on the surface of the scale. So I'm going up to like here, saying 3. If I take this off, let's say, put that amount of salt that I just weighed, put that bowl back, but then add it all at once, what is actually there is 5 grams of salt. So that's a pretty huge like margin of error. So I just want everyone to kind of know when they're creating recipes that that's a thing. So what you always want to do is add your like small amounts of ingredients off the scale and then add it back on. It's also just important to weigh things while you're creating a recipe, because if you weigh like a volume amount of sugar versus weighing it on a scale, depending on everything from like how much that sugar was tossed around on its way to you, to even like the temperature in the room and kind of how dense the air molecules are. If you weigh a cup, it can vary by up to 20% of its volume. So you'd always want to like weigh something. Also, it's just cleaner because you can do everything in kind of one container, and you don't have to be kind of throwing containers around, making more dishes for yourself, etc. So that's a scale. You can buy these online. They do not have to be expensive. I have a few brands I like. This is a Scali. This will last like 6 months in a professional kitchen, but it's really cute for home use. You don't have to spend a ton of money on something that'll like work for you. But I always recommend do everything on a scale. It's the most consistent. You don't have to be running around during service and adjusting because your simple syrup is like sweeter today than it was yesterday, you know?
I have been trying to stay away from scale since this pandemic started. So
Yeah.
I don't go by the scale, but that one I can get on board with.
So then I want to talk about, well, you always want to keep your knives sharp. I'm going to leave it at that. Keep your knives sharp. It is safer for you. You don't have to spend a ton of money on a knife, but just keep it sharp and people in the kitchen will respect you more. I promise. All right, I'm going to talk about sugar a little bit because that's kind of the theme of the day. When we talk about sugar, I know that Demerara is supposed to be healthier for you. I know there's all these sugar sweeteners out there. You want to use good old sucrose. It's got the fewest number of impurities in it. If you're making something that you want to look really nice in a clear drink, you want to use regular sugar. For flavoring things, by all means, use maple syrup, use Demerara, use honey. Those are all amazing things. But for like most of these recipes, what we're going to build on is regular sugar. Then we have our invert sugars, which are also really useful, and I think not a lot of bartenders know how to use, but will really come in handy going into the summer months and frozen drinks. Invert sugars are basically just broken down sucrose. So the sucrose molecule and most sugars that we eat that taste like sugar and work like sugar are made up of glucose and fructose. Fructose tastes the most sweet. That's the sugar that's mostly found in fruit. And glucose tastes not very sweet on that spectrum. So sucrose is right in the middle. It tastes the best to us because we can process it really easily and it makes candy. But glucose is really helpful because it doesn't taste that sweet. And when you want to make a slushy drink and make it freeze into that nice smooth texture, but not have it like achingly sweet, that's a really good tool. Honey, so invert sugar basically uses an enzyme, which is usually acid, to break down sucrose into fructose and glucose, and that traps water in it. So it also prevents ice crystallization and sugar crystallization and makes things more stable and less likely to burn, which is helpful for pastry, not so important in bars, but it inhibits ice formation. So in the slushy drink, it'll also make that a lot smoother. You can buy that online. You can buy it in 50-pound tubs for restaurants. Super, super useful.
Tips and tricks.
Yeah, and is actually the same as like glucose, except the enzyme in it isn't an acid. It's an enzyme found in bees. I love honey because it tastes delicious. But for some of these recipes that we're going to be talking about today, since we are using a Mexican spirit, we're going to be using agave syrup as well, which is also delicious.
A lot of what's the easiest way to tell if your honey is not faked? Is there a trick?
Pay more for it. I hate to say that, but
just have to get the expensive stuff, huh?
Yeah. You want it to have like a natural flavor, which comes from what the bees eat when they're or what they're gathering pollen from, not what they eat, but kind of. Like clover is a really good neutral one. That's kind of the one you'll find most often. Wildflower is my kind of personal favorite. It is also super versatile. That's what I have here. Mm-hmm. And they have everything from like blackberry honey to buckwheat honey, which is like this, and chestnut honey, which are these crazy strong flavors that are really beautiful for very specific uses.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, good to know. I was just curious because I know that I have some fake honey, but it also was like $3 for the bottle.
Yeah, and there's like fake maple syrup as well, and that's all corn syrup, which is kind of made in the same way as glucose syrup. That's when you break down starches in plants, potatoes, corn, whatever, to make a very, very like simple and thick chain of glucose or what have you. But that's the science of it. That's kind of nerdy. You don't need to know all of that to make the things we're going to talk about, but it's kind of nice to know how they work. Another great tool is a thermometer. You're going to need that for some of the recipes we're doing. This is one of the more expensive ones you can buy that I just love because it's really pretty and easy to use. This is over $100. They also make the thermopops, which are little, and those are, I think, 60 or 70, depending on what sale they're having. You can also buy one for $10 from a restaurant supply store that are just as good, but they don't necessarily register temperature quite as quickly, and that's kind of useful in some applications. The other thing I'm just going to mention is that it's really important to make sure the material that you're cooking in is neutral. You want to use stainless steel. You can't really tell because stainless steel is obviously not stainless, but this is a stainless steel pot. When you're using sugar, but especially when you're using acid, like any fruit of any kind, if you're making a jam, which we'll talk about, you want to make sure that you're cooking in stainless steel because otherwise the acid is going to react with something like aluminum and it's going to give you off flavors and weird colors. You also want neutral like spatulas, heat-proof everything is always great. I'm a big fan of Silpats or silicone mats. This is like the off-brand from Amazon. This is a lot less expensive than the $50 French version, but it works just as well. Yeah, and that's kind of the basics for what we're gonna use today. So I'm just gonna kind of show and tell a few techniques that I think are really useful in a bar, and then I'm gonna do a couple of demos. Let's start talking about candied lemons. So I really don't like when people just straight up dehydrate sliced citrus. I think it's usually cut too thick, which has to do with, again, sharp knives. But I also just don't want to eat it because I think it ends up tasting kind of like stale and it's not a very nice texture. I always think if you're going to put a garnish on a drink, you want to show what you can do and not what you don't know how to do well, because it's an opportunity to show off and not something you want to detract from a gorgeous cocktail. Cocktails don't need garnishes. If you're going to put one on there, you want to make sure it's nice. Yeah. So these recipes, I believe Brittany is attaching to this video or will at some point, but there's a really simple technique for making candied lemons. I'm just going to hold this up. This is how I do it. I know, right? And it's like kind of like glass. It crackles, but it's a little bit chewy, so it's not like a hard piece of hard candy. And it keeps forever. So you can make a million of these and then juice whatever scraps of the lemons, and they keep forever. So it is more work up front, but it's actually more efficient moving forward. So what you do with these is you want to slice them as thin as possible with your very, very sharp knife. You're going to blanch them. Blanching tends to draw out bitterness, and depending on which fruit you're using, you're going to blanch them more or less. So like oranges, I don't really think you need to do if they're like a blood orange or kind of eating orange type. But lemons are a little bit more bitter, so you definitely want to cook them, as my recipe says. You want to kind of cover them with water, doesn't matter how much. Bring them up to a boil, let them boil for like 30 seconds-ish, and then drain them really gently because you want them to stay intact. And then you want to cover them in simple syrup, bring that up to a boil again, and then just chill them. And then you want to dehydrate them by laying them out flat. Either you can use a dehydrator. There are some really, really wonderful dehydrators on the market for not much money, and definitely not considering what labor you can save. Or I just did it in my oven because I'm at home on a Silpat. And yeah, these are so much nicer than kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, and it sounds like they taste better too.
Yeah, they're actually, it's balanced. Yeah. That peel is balanced with sugar. You can infuse it with tea or with hibiscus is always my favorite to use because it turns things pink. Yeah. So you can make lemon rinds. Yeah, especially for lime, since that is going to like turn a little bit darker. You can play with those flavors. You could, use charcoal if you wanted to. Just make it intentional.
Yeah. Cool.
Those are the lemons. I'm going to talk about fruit leather because that's a really great way to use waste from infusions as well. I know from Phoebe's class on last Tuesday, I believe, she talked a little bit about like making shrubs and everything. You could definitely use the fruit from that. You basically just grind it up and cook it down with some honey or sugar or whatever flavoring you want to make fruit leather, which you can make into garnishes. So this is kind of a nice sheet of that. I put some spent vanilla pods that I ground up with sugar in as a sweetener for this. This is just the insides of oranges, which I know bars often have a lot of extras because you use them as garnishes, but if you don't have a brunch program, you don't use the juice much. So yeah, you can cut these into all kinds of shapes. You can make like a twist shape and put that in a drink. You could cut it into like ribbons and tie it around the stem of a drink. It's edible, it's delicious. It kind of reminds you of what you got as a kid growing up, and it's all natural. It's not, you know, it's not hard to make.
Looks delicious.
Yeah. So you can make it with strawberry, you can make it with orange. I put vanilla in this, so it kind of has a creamsicle flavor, that orange kind of vanilla flavor. If you do use fruit from an infusion, you might want to flavor it a little bit more aggressively because a lot of the flavor of that fruit and the freshness of that fruit is taken out of that fruit when you infuse it. So again, I would add tea, I would add spices, anything is your canvas. Citric acid is another really, really great ingredient just to kind of add that flavor of freshness.
I use a lot of citric acid here in the house because the fruit goes bad, or if I didn't know until now how to candy lemons, but I use a lot of it just for cocktails and stuff because it just sits in the cabinet and it doesn't go bad. Yeah,
it's zero waste. It doesn't make a mess. Like it's an easy way to adjust a tiny bit. You know, fruit is a plant. It's different every time. It's even if you have a recipe for something and you follow it to a T, if it involves something like a plant, it's going to turn out a little bit different every time. So you want to be able to adjust for that. Yeah. Cool. So that's the fruit leather. I want to talk about marmalade because I think it's a thing that people tend to not like because they've had really bad versions of it, but it's a really, really great way to use waste from juicing. So I made a grapefruit marmalade with hibiscus because my grapefruits were really gross and they didn't have much color in them. But so I call this trash or garbage marmalade because it's from literally something you would throw out. So I peeled the grapefruit, I juiced the grapefruit. This is all I used for to make this jam. Again, you want to blanch it, especially if it's grapefruit, which is very, very bitter and thick in the rind. So I blanched it twice. Again, this recipe will be in the link that Brittany sends out. Blanched it twice, and then you cook it for a really long time to kind of extract the pectin from the that half of the grapefruit. I'm sorry if you hear whining, it's my dog who's
he's like, who are you talking to?
He's fine. It's like his other kennel. He gets himself under there and he can't get out. But so I added hibiscus to this, so you can see after it's cooked, it's all soft. After you cook it, you want to strain it either for several hours or overnight, and you retain that liquid because that's essentially your pectin stock. And I put solids in about half of the jam I cooked, so I kept this. You're going to want to scoop out the center and like cut it up into whatever size kind of bits you want. But and then you cook it with sugar and whatever else you want. So that recipe will also be included, and I'm going to refer you guys to a really great book of recipes for kind of preserving. But
I'm to ask a question. What temperature should the oven be for the drying of the fruit if you don't have a dehydrator?
Good question. Depends on what kind of oven you have. Electric is not super ideal because it tends to have like a pretty high threshold for what heat it is. But luckily most restaurants have like a gas range, and under that is usually a gas oven. Unfortunately, all of these ovens are completely different. If you've ever worked in a kitchen, you know that these things are like never standard for some reason. So the lowest setting, and it's just gonna vary for how long it takes depending on what kind of oven you have. Mine is the gas oven, and it took 3 hours. But again, it varies, and it'll say this in the recipe, it varies on how thick you spread the fruit leather. When you cook it down, you cook it to kind of like a paste where you can like draw a line through it, and you want to spread that as thin as possible. Sorry, I forgot to mention that part. And you basically just dehydrate it until it's tacky, and you can kind of lift it up. It's going to take just a couple of times of trying it out to kind of establish that
what temperature your oven is best.
And I always say at the end of this kind of class too, don't be afraid to fuck things up. Like you're throwing away, in this case, you know, maybe some citrus you're going to throw out anyway, and sugar, which is very, very inexpensive. So like, fuck it up. make mistakes, try things out. Don't be afraid. You have the only thing your time, and what are you going to do?
Yeah.
They good at it now.
We all have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Right now.
So for the marmalade, for the bar, it might not make too much sense to keep the solids in. Like here, I'm going to show you on these plastic spoons that I kept from delivery because they're white and you can see. But you can see that I cut like very, very small chunks in there. That's nice for eating. If you do want to do a textured cocktail, you can leave those in there. But what you can also do is strain it out. And then what you basically have is like a soda concentrate, like a bitter grapefruit soda. That's really delicious. And again, you can flavor it however you want. So make something really unique. So I made like a grapefruit jelly.
Color.
Yeah. And that's because I used a non-reactive pot. You get a much better color. And because of this. But yeah, it stays bright. It's really clear. You can shake this into a cocktail. Like you could make a spicy paloma with Ancho Reyes and Montes. You do want to refrigerate this unless you actually put it through the canning process, because botulism is not fun, I've heard. But you can process it in jars, but at the volume you probably will be using it, it's not really worth it, and you're carrying around like a lot of weight that way. So I would just put it in quart containers or Cambros and keep it in the fridge or freezer. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of a cool ingredient. I've put like Aleppo pepper and done like a Middle Eastern paloma before in a grapefruit marmalade. You can use lime. It'll keep its color a little bit better than just dehydrating. Yeah, it's super versatile.
Awesome. Yeah. I love jelly. Or marmalade.
And it's super gratifying to make jam, and as Phoebe discussed last week, marmalade's a little tricky because you do have to balance that bitterness, especially if you're just using the pith. But it's so rewarding, and it's such a unique thing. Like bartenders get bitter. You love bitter flavors. You know how to use them and balance them. So I think it's a really cool opportunity to make something special for your bar.
What is the shelf life on the marmalade?
As long as you keep it in an appropriate container where there's not too much oxygen exposure on the surface, it'll keep indefinitely. When I've worked at a place where I made an actual ton of jam, we kept it in giant Cambros in the freezer, and it's as long as you keep it cold enough that bacteria can't grow and there's not it's not touching oxygen. It'll forever. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
I forgot to talk about storage too. So because sugar is hygroscopic, which means it loves water, it draws in water. In case you've ever left, like a lollipop out uncovered and noticed it gets sticky after, that's because sugar will literally pull water from the atmosphere and absorb it, which is great for baked goods because it means they stay fresh for a really long time, but it is an actual nightmare for candy. So whenever you store something with a lot of sugar in it, you want to keep it in something airtight, like a jar or a plastic container. You can buy silica packets online that are really great for storage if you're making.
Those are what come in your shoe boxes.
Or, don't put the ones from your shoes.
No.
But yeah, you can buy them through most food service supply companies, and yeah, that's a good way to store things. Also, when you're using your garnishes, you want to take out only what you'll need for service, leave the rest in an airtight container, and then I like to divide things up so that if someone drops something, you don't lose everything, or if something above it leaks, you don't lose all of your product. If you spend enough time making something, you don't want to lose it all to dumb reasons.
Good point.
Okay. All right, now we're going to make some Ancho Reyes glass, which I know you're super excited about. So I already measured out glucose syrup, which is great for, again, preventing crystallization, and agave syrup, which is just a nice flavor. You can kind of use whatever sugars you want in there. You could use honey and actual sugar, and some Ancho Reyes. And I put that all in my pan. I'm going to start heating that up, and we're going to bring it to a pretty high temperature. We're going to bring it all the way to 315 degrees.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add a tiny bit of citric acid and salt. And some lime zest that I also dehydrated. Another kind of fun way to preserve things before you juice is you can just take a microplane. Got my favorite one over here. This guy, I like the big one, so it's not always kind of slipping off the citrus. This is the microplane brand, I guess. I didn't know that was a thing, but this is always my favorite. So I just zested some limes, put them in my oven at very low, and you have this bright green kind of fun thing to use. So because we're using Ancho Verde in this one, in this candy, I'm going to use something green on top. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Ancho Verde?
Yeah, so, well, since we're making glass, we should probably just talk about the bottle, which I find super interesting for Ancho Reyes. This is actually modeled after look, she's got the little bottle. Yeah, this is actually modeled after vintage medicine bottles from the time in 1920s Puebla. And these bottles were really expensive when you when they're produced for medicine. So you oftentimes you would reuse these bottles over and over and over again because they cost so much. So on the outside of the bottle here, you can see there's some tick marks on both sides. And this is really just so that when you're holding the bottle, you don't drop it because again, they're very expensive.
Yeah.
And these tick marks on the side also were meant to measure out how much medicine or whatever else was in there you were pouring out. Another really cool thing about, and people say to us all the time, is how busy the label is. There is a lot going on here. But in the 20s, not only in Mexico, but in a lot of different places, you would want to put everything you could on your product that showcased how much more superior it was to anything else that was like it. So on the bottle here, it's got 1927, hecho in Mexico. It's also got Puebla here, altísima calidad, which means highest quality. It definitely tells you that it's chili poblano liqueur. And then obviously over here for Ancho Original, it says Ancho liqueur. And the difference between those two chilies, they're actually the same chili, just one is sun-dried. And El Original, I mean, this label, any graphic designer would say that we were crazy for having so much go on the label, but it obviously worked out in our favor. People love the design now, but we were getting a little flack when we came out with this, like, whoa, that's too much on that label. But they still went with it. Super, super cool. And the bottles are, everything that goes into this bottle, it's all made in Mexico. So the lids, the labels on the front, the glass is made in Mexico. It's 90% poblano chili, and then the other 10% is a neutral cane spirit that we source from Veracruz. So really everything that goes into the bottle, aside from that neutral cane spirit, is all done in Puebla.
That's awesome.
There is a question, are Ancho Minis available in Texas? I wish I had an answer for that, but if you give me your email address, then I can ask that question and get back to you. The last time I was in Texas, I didn't see any minis. So it varies from state to state.
No one should only be drinking 50 milligrams or milliliters of Ancho.
Yeah, you need the whole bottle. She's helping me sell.
Bottle.
Yeah.
So not to cut you off, but
no, you're good. I'm good.
So this came to 315. We're gonna add our salt and citric acid just to balance it out, and because everything's more delicious with salt in it, no matter what it is. Because this is so sweet, it's actually really great. The flavors I've done of like lollipops and glass before, I usually pick something that's either very sour, a spirit or flavoring rather, that's either very sour, spicy, or bitter. I love using Amaro for lollipops because your base is basically just sugar. You want to add something that kind of balances that, and then balance that out with citric and salt. So it's going to bubble up pretty violently. I'm making a very small batch, but I'm going to try and show you. As soon as you mix anything into it, it's going to kind of yell at you a little bit and get really angry, but just stir it and kind of wait for it to settle down. I have my Silpat that is hanging out in my off oven because my kitchen is tiny, that I'm going to pour this out on as soon as it kind of stops bubbling. If you pour it out now, it's not going to kind of have the right shape for what you want the final thing to be. So again, we're just stirring, letting it come down to temperature. This is brown, kind of a brownish color, because ancho and agave syrup are both kind of that color. But if you say just made a regular glass with sugar and glucose syrup and put in a clear spirit, it would be clear if you cook it to the right temperature. Another thing I want to mention about cooking, or about using these thermometers. Sorry, my dog's losing his mind.
I can hear it. That's so cute.
Another thing I want to mention is that there's a tip about this big on the thermometer, and if you only put in the very, very tip, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Chandler, I have asked my counterpart who works for Casa Lumbre if we do have minis in Texas available. So if I get an answer back before we get off here, I'll give you that. But if not, I have your email address here and I will send you a personal email. But thank you for the support, and we'll do whatever we can to get you those minis.
Sorry, to continue, you want to make sure that you are immersing at least the whole kind of reader part into whatever you're cooking to get an accurate reading of the temperature. Because I'm cooking such a small amount, I'm tipping the pan to kind of make sure that that's completely submerged. Just a tip for like using a thermometer accurately. So if I were making lollipops, which I will show you what I did yesterday, I would pour this syrup into those molds with the sticks all set up. As it is, I'm just going to pour it out onto the silpat and let it set. And then if we have time at the end of the marshmallow part, then we will crush that into glass and make kind of a rim situation.
What kind of mold for the lollipops? Are they just like spherical molds?
I'll show you.
Okay.
They're like a flat circle.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to pour this out. It's still a little bit bubbly, but because we're not doing any kind of specific shapes, that's fine. I'm just going to spread it thin. It's going to be easier to crush up into kind of nice shapes if I do that.
I think as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to try this, like immediately.
Another fun thing to do, and I'll show you kind of what I did, but this is how you do it, is if you kind of just drizzle it like this, you can make a really kind of cool spidery shape, like not spidery, spider web shape.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to use that lime zest and just kind of sprinkle that over, so it gives it a green color that contrasts really nicely with the brown. And when you grind it up, it'll have that kind of like essence of lime.
Cool.
What I noticed when I tasted what I made yesterday with Ancho is that, especially in candy, you definitely get a lot of that flavor at the end. So it's nice to kind of have citrus and like sugar up front, and it kind of like fades into the spice, which is really, really wonderful and warming. So that's that. What I just poured out. You can see this kind of fun shape. You could put that in a cocktail. I'm going to put this over or in my oven to set, and then I'll show you what I made yesterday, which is wrapped very tightly because, again, I live in New York and it is incredibly humid here, even if it's not hot. So that's super fun for making candy. So these are the lollipops I made.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Ancho Verde, a little bit of lime zest on that side. If you made a stirred cocktail with Ancho Reyes, you could kind of serve it with this instead of a straw. So someone could stir it and dilute it themselves. That's and then this is the glass I made. So you can literally like pick it up. You could set that on top of a cocktail if you're doing like a competition kind of showcase piece. This might not be super, super practical for a menu cocktail if you're going to be making 50 of them a night, but fun and stuff to do for.
We do have a question here. What do you recommend to combat the jump of temperature while making candy or working with higher temperatures and sugar? Should I read that again?
I guess when, like.
He said he's had a number of disasters. What do you recommend to combat the jump of temperature while making candy or working with higher temperatures and sugar?
Well, you don't want to combat, and I guess it depends when that jump is that he's talking about.
Yeah. Maybe he'll elaborate a little, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, he means seasonally. Again, it's like the humidity thing. You just want to make sure that it's stored correctly. And like, there's only so much you can do. I've tried to make meringues in the summer in New York, and it's like,
Oh yeah, they just fall.
Sometimes it's just not a practical thing with that time and place. It's sad to give up, especially because I love meringues, but
Yeah.
you got to do what you got.
Totally.
You know, you anyone who's written a cocktail menu and gone really or a dessert menu and been really ambitious and then realized that they can't actually make something work to scale, it's sad, but you know, you gotta work with what you've got. Okay, so that's lollipops and glass. Again, we're gonna let that set up, and then
you can get those molds just on like online somewhere, or is there?
Yeah. Normally, I would say JB Prince or a restaurant supply store. Amazon has them for very inexpensive, which is nice. The lollipop sticks also I got on Amazon. I know we're not supposed to shop there right now, but
Yeah.
right now.
I have another question. Have you ever tried making candies like the lollipops? And if so, any suggestions on packaging? So maybe she's speaking of something small.
Yeah. I mean, you can pour it onto the silpat in any shape. Like you can actually make lollipops just free form and like put the sticks and draw circles kind of like you would for macarons or something, and then just onto that. They'll be thinner, but that's totally possible. You could just you could pour it into any mold. You could make, you could pull it. I know Liz Porter's the candy pulling queen, so we're for all questions for her. You can make it with anything. So the other flavors I've done in the past have been like, Coca-Cola with old, like unused Luxardo syrup. Everyone like has a ton of that left in the tub after you're done with all of those cherries for Manhattan. So you can use that to make like a cherry cola lollipop.
Yeah. Like the question that I asked you was, there was a typo. So have you ever tried mailing candies like lollipops and suggestions on packaging?
Yes. I'm gonna take a water bottle away from my dog because that he's chewing on, but
Sure.
he's normally so good, but of course he picks this time to be really high maintenance. Actually, after I toured the St. George facility last year, I made Bruto Americano lollipops and sent them their way. So I actually bought bags, which I think I have right here, on Amazon as well, and I like trimmed them a little bit, and I just kind of like made them smaller, but gathered them around like that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Old twist tie.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's cute.
I also made Angostura lollipops. I've made those for Amoria Margot, just because Souther did something really nice for me.
I love Max.
And yeah, I'm trying to think of what other flavors I've done. Anything tart, anything bitter, anything spicy. Like you want those really assertive. Oh, I've done Campari lollipops as well. Those are great. Those flavors all carry over into candy really well because they need to be balanced. So yeah. All right, let's make some marshmallows. This is the really dramatic one. I've never done the
marshmallow.
So this will be fun. So I have here in my pan, already measured out by the magic of television demos. I have agave syrup in place of honey. I usually use a little bit of honey for flavoring and marshmallows, but agave works great for this. I have about half of my Ancho Reyes in here, sugar and glucose syrup. I'm going to heat this to 245 and then cool it. And then meanwhile, I have the rest of my Ancho Reyes, regular flavor, and my sheet gelatin all weighed out, and water. And I'm going to bloom that in my bowl. I'm going to talk about. What do you
mean when you say bloom that?
Yes. So sheet gelatin is a wonderful thing. If you've ever made Jell-O shots, you probably use Jell-O, but you can make shots if you just have regular unflavored sheet gelatin. Don't eat that.
Okay.
I like powder. Most pastry chefs I know do. I think it's just because it's easier to it's less messy and it's just easy. So what you need to do when you use this is soak it in liquid before you melt it. Basically, gelatin, if you think about it as like a bunch of little squiggly, or a bunch of like little, let's say, what are those like blocks that you build on?
Oh, Legos.
Yeah, Legos. But like, yeah. So if you think of it as a bunch of Legos just in a sheet, once you melt it and then whip a bunch of air into it, and it cools down, it's gonna set again. And if you do it right, it sets around the air and it gets nice and fluffy. And it's a really delicious thing. It's pretty hard to make marshmallows with any substitute to animal gelatin, so this is not vegan or vegetarian. Gelatin, it's like basically the collagen in bones and skin, just gross. But, it makes the best candy. It just has the best texture. There's not really a great vegan substitute that I found, but if anyone has suggestions, I'm open to them. So I'm gonna wait for this to come up to 245, which is about when we're gonna use the sugar to help kind of set that structure of a marshmallow. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, or continue telling us about?
In terms of Ancho Reyes and cocktail application, obviously spicy cocktails are really, really popular, and they have been and probably will be for quite some time. But with Ancho Reyes, I mean, when you're taking a half ounce or an ounce of this and putting it into a cocktail, the spice, I wouldn't say that the spice goes away completely, but it definitely mellows out considerably. But the idea in my mind behind Ancho Reyes is not necessarily always about making your cocktail spicy. These two flavors, although very, very different, are made exactly the same way. One of these poblano chilies are fire roasted, and then on the opposite end, the poblano chilies are sun-dried. But when you're using them in cocktails, you're getting a lot more than just that spice factor. You're getting in Ancho Verde a lot of grilled pineapple notes, tropical flavors, sort of those green vegetal notes, which are really cool and definitely enhance a cocktail in a lot of different ways other than just adding a spice. And then on the other side, you're getting these rich, complex sort of caramelized flavors, tamarind, cinnamon, baking spice type flavors. And then that is adding to your cocktail as well. Ancho Reyes Original is really well suited for stirred cocktails. So elevating a Manhattan or an old fashioned. I know there's a lot of purists with Manhattan, but elevating an old fashioned, elevating a Vieux Carré, it does have some sugar content. So you're going to want to dial back and kind of get the cocktail balanced in that sense. But on the other side, this one is really well suited for shaken cocktails like palomas or margaritas, or this is actually very, very delicious in a daiquiri, traditional recipe, just a little bit less sugar because, again, there is some sugar content. But both these products are so different, but I just love the fact that they're made the exact same way. I just think it's so cool. But again, point being, it's not always about just the spice. It's about adding some complexity, different layers of flavor to your drink.
Awesome. All right, so my sugar came up. Now, so I don't completely obliterate the structure of the gelatin sheets, we need to cool it down a little bit. So basically what I've done is I've cooked the sugar to hard crack, which is not quite hard candy, but it's like, it's cooked all of the water out of it, and it's changed the molecular structure enough that it's going to kind of hold a structure. This is what you would make like a marshmallow, what you make marshmallows with. I'm trying to think of what other candy, what you would make a caramel with, maybe. No, you would.
Yeah. So it's a little more malleable is kind of what you're saying.
More malleable than the hard candy,
right.
For sure. But yeah, but still has like, we've changed the sugar for sure. Now I'm cooling it down a little bit. I'm going to cool it down to like 215, and then I'm going to whip it into this gelatin. So after soaking for even just when you were talking, so less than 5 minutes, it's all, let me try and take out a piece. You don't have to touch it at this point, but it's all kind of stretchy and soft. And that's the stage you want it to be at before you put something hot into it and melt it. So basically I just have this like puddly mixture in this bowl, and I'm going to add sugar to it, and it's going to be magic, which is kind of fun.
Yeah,
Marshmallow.
you gotta say bam when you throw it in there.
Yeah, it like you fucked it up first. I just want to warn everyone, like it's really gelatin's fun like that. It kind of fucks with you before it does what you want it to. So it's gonna look like just a puddle of nothing, and then once it cools down enough, it'll look great. So it's about where I want it to be. You want it to be below 215, even a little bit below that is fine. So I'm reading, it's about 209, 208 now.
Great.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna see if this hand mixer is gonna do what I want it to.
So the hand mixer is going to sort of aerate everything to make it that fluffy whip that is a marshmallow.
So they used to make marshmallows with egg whites. I've always found that they don't have quite as much of a shelf life as a gelatin based marshmallow. So I'm going to start real low, mostly because I don't want any of this sugar to end up on me or my powders.
Dog.
Pouring it down the side and trying not to get it directly on the beaters, but kind of helping it, getting it to melt that gelatin. So low temperature, pouring it all in. It's hard to show you, but at this point the gelatin is all melted and it's basically just like a big pile of soup. Looks like nothing. Get that all in there. And now I'm gonna raise the speed and start whipping air into it before it pops. I apologize, it's very loud. Again, a KitchenAid works much better, but I don't have one of those in my very small apartment. The benefit of doing this, this class in person is that I bring samples for everyone. Everyone gets to eat candy. And I also have access generally to professional kitchens to prep for it, but this is fun because you get to see it.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to pick up my camera and show you old fashioned because I don't know how to do it any other way. So this is what it looks like now. This looks like some melty, foamy, whatever. And the next time I show it to you, it's actually going to be marshmallow.
We have a question. Where can we read further about the skills and techniques and recipes? And do you have any recommendations for books or sources books or sources to continue learning about these skills?
Was that for references?
Yeah, like, do you have any recommendations on books?
I do. I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorites at the end of this.
Awesome.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
That's okay. I thought that it was off.
What I have over here is a quarter sheet pan set up with parchment paper. This is what I'm going to spread this out on. And then my favorite cooking spray, Vegeline. It is like ham, but it doesn't taste like fake butter.
Good.
The best one I've found. Okay, I promise only 60 more seconds of this noise torture.
Sure. It's funny because I can't even hear that, but you just sound muffled. No.
Oh, I can hear. All I can hear. Oh, perfect. I'm glad it's not torturing anyone else.
Yeah.
So I'm beating this. The reason I haven't added my salt yet is because I don't want to kind of break that structure quite yet. I want it to kind of stabilize before I add any other chemical ingredients. Speaking of chemicals, if you do make any tropical flavors with gelatin, pineapple, and kiwi, and I think a couple other tropical fruits have enzymes in them that basically denature gelatin, so you want to be really careful about your heat when you make something like that. So the Bavarian might be a great way to get that pineapple flavor in.
Yeah.
I think this would probably make a really great hot chocolate edition for next winter.
Yeah. We have a really great recipe, or I have a really great recipe with Ancho Original into like a slow cooker hot chocolate with cocoa and chocolate and oat milk and the whole thing. And it's so good. Adds the pounds, but it's worth it.
Yeah. This won't set in time for me to kind of show you how I cut them and store them, but what you want to do when this is all set, like the next day, is cut them up and toss them in a half and half mixture of cornstarch and powdered sugar. And for these, I'm probably going to add a little bit of cinnamon, just kind of warm up front because as we discussed, like I taste most of this on the back end, so I think it'll be nice to have that rounded candy flavor. Okay, so I'm going to show you this guy again. Now it's kind of white and fluffy, but it's still very soupy and liquid. So it's definitely not ready to pour out yet because it just doesn't have enough air incorporated. Once it's set, it's going to come when it's starting, the sugar starting to cool and kind of create those threads around the air bubbles. Mm-hmm. It's almost. Actually, I'll talk about these books while I'm doing. So, first reference that I love. Benefits of having a small kitchen, I can reach everything. Candy is Magic by Jamie Curl. Great reference for some basic candy recipes. My last recipe is based on one of hers. My marshmallow recipe is not, but I'm sure it's really awesome. This lady has a candy company in Portland, and this is just a really great kind of starting point for a lot of fruit-based like candies and like chewy candies, gummy bears, stuff like that. She's an awesome authority. Nice. Two, Blue Chair Jam Cookbook. I'm sure anyone who's made a lot of jam in their day, this is a great reference. I use this kind of my starting point for all ratios. I'm using, nectarines for the first time or something. When I was using nectarines for the first time in jam, I would start with her ratio of sugar to fruits. So really, her marmalade recipe is also fantastic. Definitely a great starting point, and she kind of talks about the technique behind jarring everything. If you are interested in doing that for home use otherwise. All right, almost. And then my favorite, this one's the sciencey one for nerds. They think it's like it's kind of like a science textbook about just all of the different ingredients in baking. Obviously not all of them are totally applicable to the bar, but they have a whole chapter on eggs. They have a whole chapter on sugar, which is my favorite. If you're interested in kind of the molecular explanation behind why food interacts with other foods, it's fascinating, and it's in like pretty relatable terms. I'm not a chemist or scientist by any means, but I understand it and I love it. So Paula Frigoni, I don't know what edition they're on at this point because she's been putting this out for years, but we're almost there with these marshmallows. It's just taking a little bit longer because the guy doesn't have quite as much manpower.
Your mixer is tired.
Better than doing it by hand. That's how they. Whenever I think about what they did before they had electricity, I'm just.
They had big muscles.
I can't imagine doing this before there were commercial mixers. People used to make marshmallows by hand.
Yeah. Oh, they didn't come from a tree. Just kidding.
Oh, they therefore are the size of my portion. All right, we are almost there. So we now I can kind of show it's whipped. It's got this kind of fluffiness to it. We just need to let it cool down a tiny bit more, but it's starting to kind of the mixer's kind of leaving a shape on the surface. So it's almost there.
So you'd say that you need it to kind of be a little more tacky and thick before it's ready to
you want it
pour.
Almost. And when it's doing that, you can actually make freeform marshmallows if you want, like you can fennel marshmallows if you have that kind of time and inclination. You can make like ropes and cut those instead of just pouring it out. For making a lot of them at a time, if you have a hot chocolate on a miracle menu and you want to be able to make 500 of them in the time it takes them to do this, then I would definitely pour it out and cut them into shapes. But after this, you can cut them into any shape you want, like cookie cutters or scissors. All right, getting there. Perfect. Is there anything else about Ancho Reyes while we got you?
I think that the main takeaway with these two brands is we like to call them the bartender's hot sauce. I like to call them the bartender's hot sauce. Everybody knows about the bartender's ketchup. When you go to an authentic Mexican restaurant, you're given a red and a green salsa. So we like to say that this really is like your red and your green salsa for cocktails. There really isn't any imitations or any kind of, we don't have any competitors, thank God. But we also, when we started this product, we were a little shocked that nobody else had sort of done anything like this. But we spent a lot of time tracing back, and as far as we could go was to the Reyes family, and they were sort of the first known family to be creating this concoction. And it's inspired by old world spirits that were sort of coming through Puebla, which is in the center of a trade route from Veracruz to Mexico City. So all of these spirits were coming through this trade route on their way to Mexico City, and people of Puebla were like, well, why aren't we making our own, spirit? Which, I mean, obviously they had been making mezcal, but liqueurs weren't really a thing there yet. So Poblanos are Puebla's most prized crop. Poblano translates to of Puebla in English. So it was only natural for us to sort of revive this beautiful spirit. And again, as I said before, I think it's so interesting how different the flavors are. And I'm sure you know now, because you've had both of them by themselves, they're so different. Obviously spice is there, but I think that that's like the most interesting fact is the kind of being made the same way, but tasting completely different.
Yeah. All right, we're pretty much there. I'm going to show you this so you can kind of see it's starting to hold its shape.
Yeah.
A little bit. At this point, I'm going to add the salt. I'm eyeballing this. You should measure this. And if you wanted to add any other spices, if you wanted to add lime zest at this point, or any other like chili pieces or anything, that's totally acceptable. I would maybe normally, and we're just running up against the clock, I would maybe normally take it a little bit farther, but it's not getting a whole lot cooler in this bowl. With this here. So I'm going to pour it out now, and they might just, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
you can see it's kind of holding its shape. So I'm literally just going to toss it out on the paper. This is a half batch of what I have on the recipes that Brittany is going to distribute. But if you wanted to make a full half sheet pan, it's hard to say how many that makes because it depends what kind of size you cut them into. Yeah. But that's pretty much it. And then you want to just spray it with a little bit of hand spray and cover it up and let it set for like a good several hours, if not.
Are you going to let that set in the fridge or just out in the open air?
Out in the open. You probably want to cover it with plastic as soon as it's like cooled, but let it set for a few more hours than that. And then I don't think we have time to crush our glass on screen, but I can at least show you since we're hard now. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's the glass. You can see it. Nice glossy window pane. It's
beautiful. I love it.
Totally. This is the point at which it will definitely start absorbing moisture, so you definitely want to wrap it in plastic. That's that pretty.
Wow.
Thing. Yeah, very Instagrammable.
Exactly.
You could make a stick with this even if you wanted to like do it in kind of strips. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know. Time for some questions if anyone has.
Yeah, I don't have any more questions here. But I do have a question about this glass though. You just pulled it out of the oven. Did you just put it in there or did you turn on the oven?
The oven was off. It's just for my purpose.
I was like, that's backwards, isn't it?
I know, right? Yeah. Don't want to bake this.
Awesome.
It's done. Yeah, but you would basically, I like to just even put it in a mixing tin and just crush it up with your muddler. But you could make a rim out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's so cool. And the books, we can, if you can send those to Brittany as well, then she can put that with the recipes. That would be great. Because I am going to pick up all 3 of those.
I know. Candy one especially because it has so many beautiful pictures. But that's kind of my starter set. It's the things that I consistently like go back to and refer to if I have questions. So
Yeah, well, I mean, one of these days my husband's gonna come home and there's just gonna be all this candy glass and marshmallows everywhere.
Yeah, pretty
I'm very
addicting.
excited.
Just wait till I start doing marshmallow logs and like twisting them in different colors. Like it's great.
Yeah. Christmas, here I come.
Mhm. Yep.
Well, I think today was amazing. I mean, you were very thorough, and it doesn't seem like any more questions are coming through, but I would imagine if anybody does have one, they can kind of maybe pop it through to you on Facebook or something.
Send it my way. Instagram, Facebook, whatever's easy.
Awesome.
I'm here. I'm bored.
Thank you so much. I appreciated this, and thank you for using Ancho Reyes in these applications. It's so cool. And I am absolutely going to make some glass right now. Awesome. Well, thank you. And you take care and be safe and have a good rest of your week and weekend.
You too. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you.